Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm glad there's so many people in this workshop and a combination of ages too. I see young people and older people like me, so that always warms my heart. I'm here mainly to tell you the story of the Filipino-American community's response, and this is across the U.S., to the phenomena of the rise of President Duterte. Just to tell you a story of what's going on. And particularly with the grave concerns that have been caused by his violation of human rights, his violation of due process, his usurping of healthy checks and balances of power in government, and also his threat to democratic rule and threat to impose authoritarian rule in the country. So Rene has already told you that Duterte is very popular, right? I'm sure among us, our families, amongst our community, there are people who are optimistic about Duterte. And you know, they're not coming from a bad place. They're coming from a place where, oh my God, our country is so bad. We need a strong leader to kind of clean things up. And so he's very popular. As a matter of fact, to my dismay, the latest Asia Pulse survey showed that 87% of Filipinos still trust Duterte and 88% approve of him. This is despite the fact that I was heartened a couple of weeks ago when I read that in contradiction 2 weeks ago, there was supposed to be an 11-point drop in his net satisfaction rating. And that was from another survey called the Social Weather Station Survey. Maybe I got it reversed.
Yeah.
So he's still popular, undeniably. Why? Because he's projected himself, as I said, as an effective fighter against crime and corruption. He's projected himself, scrolling through my notes, sorry, as effective and efficient government, you know, like in the case when he was mayor of Davao. And he even projected himself as being on the side of the common people, such as when he was saying that he was vowing to stop the practice of contractualization. For those of you who don't know, contractualization is a measure by which workers are denied their benefits because they're never ever made permanent employees. They're always fired every 6 months and then get rehired again. So he captured the imagination of the Filipino people who were hungry for change and who were also very tired of the previous presidential administrations that happened after the overthrow of Marcos, that were either mired in corruption, such as, you know, those of Estrada and Arroyo presidencies. And in the case of the most recent prior administration of President Noynoy Aquino, an administration that was perceived to be bungling, ineffective, and lack sensitivity to the common people. And so here comes Duterte, and everybody gets really, you know, excited about it. And it seems that with his recent trust and approval ratings, there's no stopping him. He has weathered what would seem to be negative developments. You know, anybody would be dismayed, except, you know, if your president is Duterte, anybody would be dismayed by negative economic developments such as inflation. Have you all heard about inflation in the Philippines? It's galloping leaps and bounds. Anybody would be demoralized about the devaluation of the peso. It's now approaching 53, 54. Anybody would be thoroughly demoralized by the encroachments of the Chinese government on our sovereign territory. Anybody would be very, very worried about the onerous loans, the dangerous loans that the Duterte government is threatening to avail of from China that has resulted in devastation in other countries. Anybody would be dismayed about the regressive tax measure that he recently passed, which burdens the poor and not the rich. Anybody would be concerned about the failure of peace talks with the New People's Army to get off the ground. And anybody would be dismayed, most especially by the extrajudicial killings of poor people, the lowly drug addict and the lowly drug dealer. And also recently, the evidence of lawlessness in the land with the killings of priests and politicians. Anybody would be dismayed by that, but not when it's Duterte who's the president. We're very far away from that time several years ago when almost 2 million people took to the streets in outrage against the Marcos dictatorship's human rights violations. Currently, there's no such outrage, except for a small group of people here in the US who are actually organizing opposition against the Marcos dictatorship. I'm sorry. So there is opposition here in our community. Thank God. There's also, of course, opposition in the Philippines. But there are groups of people that have come together in various cities: LA, New York, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., in Canada. And they've been communicating with each other, coordinating joint actions. And who are these people? Well, one group of them is the people who oppose the Marcos dictatorship. Let me remind you, that was like 35, 40 years ago, the Marcos dictatorship. So these people are old, are getting old. But they were one of the very first people who recognized in Duterte that something's wrong with, they've lived through fighting a dictator, and they saw Duterte emerge. They saw him, proudly saying that he was going to kill people even before he was elected. Even before he was elected, they already saw the killings starting the month or two before he got elected. These people saw his offensiveness towards women, and also his wild reactions against those who were criticizing his human rights violations, and his persecution of those who were criticizing his human rights violations, such as with the jailing of Senator De Lima, and lately with the ouster of the Supreme Court Justice. So this group of people were already getting worried. But what was the singular event that galvanized action here in the US? Can anybody guess? What happened in the Philippines that finally made people act here in the US? It was the facilitation by Duterte of the hero's burial of President Marcos. So at that point, it became a focal point of action. And there were nationwide demonstrations. Everybody started talking with each other. And there was in September of 2016, there was a coordinated action across Philippine consulates across the US. And, in there were the oldies like me. I'm a former member of the Union of Democratic Filipinos, but there were also former, liberal oppositionists of the Marcos dictatorship, such as former members of the Movement for a Free Philippines. Does anybody know that group? It's a long time ago, 40 years. Nina Aquino movement. And then lately, those movements kind of morphed into what's called the US Pinoys for Good Government. That's under the leadership of Fidel Reyes, and does anybody know Loida?
Yeah.
And also during that time, in September of 2016, we also came together with left groups that were led by a left perspective in the Philippines, such as groups like Gabriela and Akbayan. So in the different cities, we actually organized a demonstration. In San Francisco, for example, where I am, we were able to get so many people. It was inspiring to come out. And after that, loose groupings of people actually remain together at each of the cities and continue to work with each other. For example, in San Francisco, we formed the Filipino-American Human Rights Advocates, and there's continued work today. You know, there's protest actions that have been done and educational events that were meant to raise awareness within the Filipino-American community about what's happening in the Philippines under Duterte. The main concerns are, of course, the threat of imposing authoritarian rule. You know, the burial of Marcos, the hero's burial of Marcos, was an attempt to rewrite the story of that time from very, very bad to very, very good. It softens the ground for any possible ambitions by Duterte to impose authoritarian rule, because things can be done under a dictatorship. You can build roads. Marcos wasn't bad after all. Let's consider authoritarian rule again as the solution to our problems. It softens the ground for the ambitions of the Marcos family, because the President Duterte and the Marcos family are very close. And Bongbong Marcos, the son of the dictator, is challenging the results of the vice presidential election and is maneuvering to steal that position from the legitimately elected vice president. And you know, and even now that Duterte is not a dictator yet, he's effectively weaponized the government with his monopoly over the executive branch, his control of the House, and apparently also his influence over the Supreme Court, which voted to oust its own Supreme Court justice. So we're back in the streets again, unfortunately. And the perspective of these people that are organizing are, digging for the long haul and raise awareness and raise concerns and raise issues. And also fervently hoping for the day when Duterte's popularity will finally take a drop. So we're doing this through protest actions. We protested the ouster of Supreme Court Justice Sereno. We had demonstrations around the anniversary of the victory of the Philippines in a United Nations ruling that said that the Philippines was in the right in its claim over the territory that was being usurped by China. And we also had a lot of visitors that we toured, including the author of the famous book, Never Again, Raisa Robles, Never Again to Martial Law, Susan Kinpo, which heads up a group called the Martial Law Chronicles, which is attempting to educate the millennials who weren't born yet, I think, when Marcos was around, about the dictatorship and its dangers. And we've brought speakers here like Senator Antonio Trillanes, who's an oppositionist senator there, and leaders of Akbayan youth. A number of us are also using the latest technology. You don't need to fly somebody to actually bring them to a forum. All you need is Facebook Messenger or Skype. So we've organized forums, for example, with Barry Gutierrez, who was a former congressman, to speak about the China issue. So we're doing this because of our conscience, where we can't be silent and we have to speak. And we're doing this also because our Filipino-American community is, of course, never broke its ties from the homeland country. We're always concerned about what's going on there. But aside from those two things, we've also known for a fact that the voice of the Filipino-American community carries an impact. So a couple of evidences of this is, I think the Filipino-American opposition created enough of a concern for the Duterte administration that they actually came out with this ridiculous charge that there was a Filipino-American plot to overthrow him. and that was focused in particular on Lloyd and Nicholas Lewis. But it's clearly a message that will hopefully, on the Duterte's part, would scare everybody from talking. In the media also, in the social media, I've noticed, and social media, is a big phenomenon in the Philippines, and there's people masterminding, opinions that are flying to the internet. And one opinion that was flying around, especially when the whole issue of Filipino-American opposition was happening, is that trolls are saying, Filipino-Americans, you don't have a right to comment about what's going on in the Philippines. You have lost your right because you're Americans now. So stay within your own country and don't intervene in our affairs. So they're trying to discredit the ability of Filipino Americans to be concerned about their homeland and to have a say in what's going on there. The good news is, again, that what the Filipino American community does matters, especially again in today's technological world. Somebody told me that she felt so inspired when GMA7 broadcasted the news of Filipino-American demonstration in huge numbers occurring in front of the Philippine consulate because of the hero's burial. So I think the people who are fighting for democracy in the Philippines get a lot of moral boost and support when they hear, the world kind of responding to their plight. And so from that perspective, the work of the Filipino-American community is important. And that's why we're doing this work of inviting everybody to raise their awareness and inviting everybody to speak out. I read a book on tyranny, and the book said something about it. When it comes to impending tyranny or impending tyrannical rule, it's important to be in opposition early, even way before you can't anymore be in opposition. Because that's one way to stop a tyrant, is when he perceives right away that people are not countenancing what he's doing. So that is the call of the day for all of us, is to be active and to really realize that this matters and raise our voices. Thank you.